What makes music original? What makes one song more compelling than another? Why does one style of music take off and become popular while another loses fans over time? I would put forward that it all comes down to synthesis, how effectively different elements in music combine to form something new and unique, which is the lifeblood of music and art in general. While it may be true, as the proverb goes, that there's nothing new under the sun, there are plenty of new ways to put together old ideas and traditions, and that's the key to making art that leaps off the page or the stage. When you think of bluegrass, you may regard it as perhaps an old tradition. It would be easy to forget how many older forms of music went into bluegrass when it burst on the scene in the mid-1940s, but it fused string band music with jazz, blues, and gospel music for starters, each of which having had their own well of musical ideas to draw from in their own beginnings. Bluegrass has proved to be an incredibly versatile foundation for a great number of styles that came after its birth, with bands and artists being categorized as any number of monikers ahead of the suffix grass: newgrass, jamgrass, chambergrass, and on and on. All of these variations on the style have served to reinvigorate and expand bluegrass music at each turn, helping to both bring in new audiences to these musical offshoots, as well as the older body of work from which they sprung. And now we arrive at Latin grass, with bluegrass, old time, and llanera music coming together in the duo Larry and Joe. Larry Bellorín hails from Venezuela and is a master of the harp as well as the 4-string guitar called the cuatro, while Joe Troop is an Earl Scruggs-style banjo player and multi-instrumentalist from North Carolina. Leaning towards the Latin side of the grass is the song you're hearing now, titled Gabanjo, which they performed live on public radio WNCW in January 2024, a song which is on their 2023 album, Nuevo South Train. I spoke with Larry and Joe at the Earl Scruggs Center in Shelby, North Carolina, ahead of their performance for the Scruggs Center's Center Stage Series in July 2024. They're also part of the lineup at the upcoming Earl Scruggs Music Festival in Tryon, North Carolina over Labor Day weekend. In our conversation, we talk in depth about the duo's synthesis of musical styles and cultures, we discover why the harp became so popular in Venezuela, and we get into how their music often has themes of social justice, with songs and lyrics about immigration and border issues in particular, and their conviction that cultural differences can be overcome without violence and discrimination. Plus, a tutorial on how to roll your R's. That and more music from Larry and Joe is all ahead in this episode. I'm your host, Joe Kendrick, welcoming you to our episode on Larry and Joe, here on Southern Songs and Stories. Southern Songs and Stories is a proud part of the lineup of both Public Radio WNCW as well as Osiris Media, the leading storyteller in music. Follow Southern Songs and Stories wherever you follow podcasts, with more at southernsongsandstories.com. We met in the green room of the Earl Scruggs Center's performance space, which was once the county courthouse in the middle of downtown Shelby, North Carolina, with Joe interpreting for Larry in our conversation. I commented about the three-finger roll that Earl Scruggs made famous and how that combination of styles and ideas that made bluegrass so interesting is the same thing that's going on with their own Latin grass, just with ideas and cultures that are geographically farther apart. Here is Joe Troop.
Right. We always talk about how Appalachian string band music, bluegrass, old-time music, has a lot to do with música llanera, música from the llano, music from the plains region of Venezuela. It's string band music. So they, instead of playing banjo, fiddle, mandolin, guitar, and bass, they play the harp, the cuatro, the bass, and other instruments we don't know so well in the States, like the bandola, which is like a Baroque-style guitar, a beautiful four-string guitar-like instrument. And they even have a minor percussion instrument. The maracas is part of their tradition. But it's pretty much string band music, just like we play in Appalachia. So it's a cool merging of traditions. We think our folk traditions are like long-lost cousins, or maybe cousins that, yeah, they're long lost. They never met each other. And then they had these parallel lives. But then they do, we were just talking about that. Like Larry and I play a song that I wrote called Love Along the Way, which is straight up bluegrass or old time. It's Appalachian string band music. It's where bluegrass and old time meet. That's a particularly beautiful spot in the music for me, having kind of grown up at the Galax Fiddlers Convention. It's like a merger of, it's when bluegrass still was kind of old time. Like, think Flat and Scruggs. You know, there's a lot of old time influence there. Anyway, lots of harps. You've heard the Celtic harp play bluegrass. People play bluegrass on the classical harp. But the only harp that really captures the sort of rustic vibe of bluegrass the right way to our ears is the Venezuelan harp, funnily. And so it just kind of is this sort of mysterious coincidence, but it gives good results. ¿Puedes hablar tú un poco de nuestras tradiciones y cómo nosotros, aunque somos de lugares geográficamente muy distintos, en nuestras tradiciones folclóricas hay bastante en común?
Sí, en nuestro folclore lo que más hace esa imagen fuerte pues son las cuerdas.
Yeah, Larry's reiterating, in our folk traditions are basically defined by strings.
Pero lo que en realidad para mí muy especial representa nuestro folclore es que son músicas de alma.
But for me, what really represents our folk traditions is that they're music styles played from the soul.
Y es muy emocionante pensar en cómo estas personas en aquellos años eran tan geniales para crear.
And it's very inspirational for me to think that people from that era were able to create these sounds. You know, people like Earl and the people that Earl was listening to and was surrounded by way back in the day. Gente de bajos recursos, además. Yeah, we were just talking about that, how oftentimes it was from humble backgrounds, so not a lot of resources to go to the conservatory and take all these. These were farmers, basically.
Make a mighty fine team. I can hear the sacred spirit coming off the strings. Sisters and brothers, won't you sing with me? 'Cause there ain't no greater force on earth than unity. I'll hold your hand if you hold mine. Life on earth is borrowed time, and as long as we're living, we ought to strive to love along the way. Yes, Lord, as long as we're living, we ought to strive to love along the way.
That is a bit of Love Along the Way by Larry and Joe, performed live on WNCW in January 2024. After hearing Joe's comment about the humble nature of the string band traditions in Venezuela, I noted that the harp seemed to be an expensive instrument for that context. Here's Larry Bellorín.
Sí, en Venezuela el arpa llanera no era tan fácil de obtener.
In Venezuela, it was not as easy to get a llanera, a plains harp.
Primero porque los primeros luthieres que fabricaron estaban en esa tierra plana.
Because the first people that made the instrument were in the flatlands themselves. And I should note, Larry is actually from the eastern side of Venezuela. This music, música llanera, where they play this 33-string harp, is played in western Venezuela. So in his case, it was very hard. It was like trying to buy a banjo in California in the 80s, I guess.
Let me ask, there are regional differences in instruments sometimes because of climate. And for example, the guitar in one region is not nearly as ideal in a less arid region, or things like this have some influence on why instruments wound up where they did, but why did the harp wind up in western Venezuela?
Yeah, y él dice que según el clima de un lugar, el instrumento debe variarse. O sea, una guitarra de zona árida no se la banca en un lugar más húmedo. Pero pregunta, ¿por qué se desarrolló específicamente el arpa llanera en el oeste de Venezuela?
Bueno, precisamente porque el arpa no era un instrumento que desciende de la parte interior de un piano.
So, precisely because this harp is a descendant of the innards of a piano.
Entonces, el campesino, por la vista que tuvo de esa parte que es el clavecín.
So, some farmer back in the day, having seen the innards of a piano in western Venezuela,
se inventó esta arpa totalmente hecha, digamos que hacha y cuchillo.
Invented this harp with an axe at the point of, with an axe and a knife, he says. O sea, es como parar lo que está dentro de un piano para arriba.
Exacto.
¿Verdad?
Y colocarle una caja detrás.
Yeah, it's like putting the innards of a piano upright and sticking a box on them. Y eso ¿por qué se hizo en el llano específicamente?
Porque la madera que más había en Venezuela para el momento, y bueno, es nuestra madera nacional, es el cedro amargo.
So there's this wood called cedro amargo, which I'm going to translate probably poorly as bitter cedar. And there was a lot of that, apparently, in western Venezuela.
Uh-huh. Y es la madera más noble para dar un sonido bonito.
And it was a very noble wood that gave a beautiful sound, a pretty sound.
Claro que igual que el banjo ha tenido transformación.
But it obviously, just like the banjo, it has transformed through the eras. ¿Y hay mucho cedro amargo en el llano?
Sí, en el llano había muchísimo cedro amargo, no sé ahora, porque la tala fue terrible durante muchos años.
Okay, so they over harvested it. But at the time, there was a lot of this wood in western Venezuela, but it's unfortunately apparently all been cut down. ¿De dónde se saca ahora?
Ahora la sacan de donde lo consiguen porque la gente comenzó a hacer cocinas y cosas y vieron la belleza de la madera. Entonces,
and the wood was so beautiful, people started using it for kitchens and cabinets and all that good stuff too.
Sí.
So,
Entonces,
furniture.
Lo que pasa es que Venezuela no tiene la variación de las 4 estaciones firmes.
Yeah, Venezuela doesn't have 4 seasons like we do here.
Porque a nivel nacional el clima es muy parecido, excepto cuando uno va a la parte de la cordillera andina.
So, and throughout the whole country, the climate is very similar until you go to the mountains, the Andes.
Entonces, el instrumento, la madera, en cualquiera de los espacios puede funcionar perfectamente.
Okay, so he's saying that the wood, wherever you are in Venezuela, works. You can't say the same thing of the United States, which we're learning as road dogs, His pork cuatro does okay in North Carolina, but after several trips to the desert, there's more cracks in that than the aftermath of a bull in a china shop. So,
We'd like to ask you about themes of social justice, economic equality, a lot of those themes that come around in your music. And I would like to know what you think about how that adds to or perhaps defines the experience of your music. What does that mean out there in the world? Do you get, blowback for this in certain places? How is this translated to what's happening on the ground in, say, your own communities or out there, the people that are listening to your music?
Yeah. So for those of you listeners that may not know, I have in my career, again, I'm the Joe of Larry and Joe. Larry is the Venezuelan guy. I'm the guy from North Carolina. I have touched on themes such as immigration reform and even in this pairing, Larry is an asylum seeker, and we work together. So the truths are self-evident. Like, we believe in sort of a borderless world in our hearts, where of course it's not a borderless world, but we believe in expression beyond borders, and borders are hotspots. They're very dangerous places where people are preyed upon. There's a lot of hardship. There's a lot of tragedy. It's definitely a sight for sore eyes. A lot of these themes came into my work because I have spent a lot of time on the Mexican-American border and working specifically with migrants, Latin American migrants of different places. And so is there pushback or blowback? I don't know. I feel like, the message isn't heavy-handed. The message is pretty, it's of love and unity, and people who would push back against that. Of course, there's plenty of people who don't, for some reason, they don't understand love, and I don't know. It's like a sickness. And do we get pushback? Most of the crowds we play for are people that are going out to listen to live music. I think the people who would push back, they're not interested in going out to listen to live music. So we're spoiled. We're in the, we're in the arts community, and people who are going to take a Thursday night to come sit in a room and watch people play their instruments. So there's a predisposition towards, I guess, what would you call that? Love, because music kind of musicians, we're lucky because people love music, and therefore we get showered in love and affection. So honestly, the blowback hadn't been that much, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't appreciate the message, and maybe they're polite enough to not come up and share their hatred with us. So. I don't know. It seems like people are there for what Larry and I are putting out in the world. I'll translate this to him and see what he has to say if that.
This brings us to the song Border Wall by Larry and Joe, which closes out their collection Nuevo South Train. Joe Troop wrote the melody and first verse of this song while on the border wall in Nogales, Mexico, while volunteering at a shelter for asylum seekers in the summer of 2021, 6 months before he and Larry met in North Carolina. It was there in Nogales that Joe says the misery on display shook him to the core, and the turmoil for people on both sides of the border inspired him to write the song. Larry and Joe's manager suggested that Larry write a verse in Spanish and that they find a third co-writer. Enter Sacred Steelmaster Deshaun Hickman.
Border wall, border wall. We can build it up taller as we call ourselves free.
Great. It's just such a heated topic now, especially with the polarization in our culture and immigration and just what's happening in our hemisphere alone with crises all around.
Yeah.
And I wonder, with you being sort of, I don't want to say it the wrong way, but you're out there in front of this, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just wondered if, like, on the ground, like, what that might look like. So well, to you too, to like, what are people saying to you about this?
I think where we experience more of that, and I'll ask Larry, I think it's more outside of our musical lives. Like, ¿cómo fue entrar en ese restaurante en Hays, Kansas, el otro día, que estamos volviendo de esa gira? ¿Quieres hablar de eso, de cómo te sentiste? Okay, so, like, racism and xenophobia and those things and the exacerbation of this, the migrants are to blame kind of mentality, say it in whatever accent, the migrants are to blame. You can hear it in any flavor of American English. It's not just the South. We experienced a pretty heavy dose of that in Kansas, of all places. We were driving across on I-70. We stopped in this little diner in Hays, Kansas, and I'll ask Larry, what happened? ¿Qué pasó ahí?
O sea, pues uno entra con la necesidad de comer y seguir la ruta.
We're just going in there to sit down and eat and keep on trucking.
Ya cuando entras, miras alrededor, pues, y miras ya inmediatamente todo está como un poco pesado para mí en específico.
And as I went in there and looked around, it was a very heavy situation for me specifically, a weighted situation.
Ya toman el pedido, no sé qué, va a tardar.
They took our
algo.
order. They said it's going to take this long.
5 minutos.
5 minutes later.
10 minutos.
10 minutes later.
15 minutos.
15 minutes later.
Estamos notando que estamos siendo totalmente ignorados.
And we just realized we were getting ignored.
Llega una familia así diagonal a de nosotros.
Yeah, this family sat right beside us. They got there after us.
Enseguida sale su comida.
Their food came out right away.
Vuelven y te dicen muy tranquilo.
And then they came back and said,
va a tardar unos 20 minutos más.
It's going to be 20 minutes later, 45 minutes after we'd been sitting there. And you know what? I mean, it was obvious. It was obvious. There's everyone was looking at Larry.
Es como que te quieres desaparecer en el instante.
And he said, and I just wished I could have disappeared at that moment.
No es tanto ponerse triste, sino sentir como que te patean.
And it's not just like you get sad. You feel like you're getting kicked. So, yeah, I mean, does this stuff happen? Sometimes we'll be waiting in line for something at some place in Middle America or some place in some city or something. And the treatment that we get is different until whoever is doing that realizes that we're together. Or sometimes it's even worse. When they realize they're together, they treat me, with some sort of like, what kind of white boy are you kind of thing. You know what I mean? I mean, that is very alive and well in this country, so.
Well, your music is going to be serving to break down some of those barriers on certain levels, so I imagine there's satisfaction in that. How much of that is your purpose, or is that just a great benefit on the side?
Yeah, well, no, inclusion is definitely a big part of our message. La inclusión es una gran parte de nuestro mensaje, ¿verdad?
Sí.
¿Por qué?
Porque entre él y yo sucede una magia.
Between me and him, that we got some sort of magic.
En la que muchos deberían verse reflejados.
Where people should see themselves reflected.
Porque de nada sirve que tengamos una identidad de nacionalidades diferentes.
Because it's very obvious that we're from different nationalities.
Si no aprendemos a convivir en comunidad.
But we have learned to live in community with one another.
Nosotros tenemos una visión de que cada presentación es más que música.
And we believe that every show of ours is more than music.
Es que mucha gente pueda mirar a lo que se puede llegar por estar en armonías.
Yeah, and we hope that people can see how far you can come by being in harmony with one another. And, the inverse of these situations that we've been talking about happened to me when we're with, cuando estamos en grupos de latinos, a veces desconfían de mí o piensan, no puede llegar a entender cómo somos nosotros, etcétera, etcétera. Y, Larry is a good buddy to me because I get the flip side of that. Sometimes when we're around, larger groups of Latinos or Venezuelans, they're basically who's this white boy? What? You're not part of this. I get, cut out, and I defend myself because I lived that. I was an immigrant in Latin America for 10 years. I was working in pesos argentinos. I wasn't a turista. I wasn't down there on vacation. I did live down there, and I lived in that economy. And I would defend myself. I'd be like, yeah, I have an American passport. It's not. I mean, I have the benefit of I could go back there, and I could. And I probably will go back and live with the benefit of being able to work in that currency, etc. But for the time being, I'm right here with y'all. So get off my back, So we experience, it's a holistically different experience, but it allows me to empathize with him and vice versa. Because sometimes after a show, some people go up and desperately want to talk to him. And I can tell there is no interest in talking with me. And in fact, they'll come up and kind of vibe me. And sometimes, and he picks up on that, and he's just like, oh, God. And we'll talk about that later. And he'll be like, wow, what is wrong with people? But the same thing happens to me. Some people feel more invited by my presence and feel like they can't communicate with him. And those people are missing the point. It's yes, it might take you more effort because culturally there are differences between y'all, but work a little bit. Intercultural communication takes being tolerant of your differences because there are differences, and it is what it is, and it's cool. It's not good or bad. It just is. It is a thing. It is a reality with which we must contend. But I think something can be gained from it. It's like the highest expression of civilized life, like being able to tolerate differences without bloodshed or without violence. You don't have to love your differences. You don't. That's okay. There's no judgment. That's where I think the left in the United States often gets it way wrong. It's no, I will be that too. I understand fully. It's no, you don't understand fully. You can't fully empathize. It is very different than you, and that's also okay. You don't have to become it. You can't become something you're not. That's a cultural value that I've seen expressed in myself. So I speak from my own learned experience that I was wrong. I thought I could be everything. I could be the world. And then I've realized, no, I'm just a white dude from North Carolina. And that is okay. That's okay, too. It's not that, what's wrong with that? With all the limitations that come there. ¿Qué pasa? Es tan feo ser güero de Carolina del Norte, ¿no?
Tú lo dices con una gracia.
Yeah, he thinks it's funny when I talk about this stuff. He likes it.
Ojalá, yo digo, ojalá fuera tan feo como tú, digo yo.
¿Qué?
Yo digo que ojalá yo fuera tan feo como tú.
¿En qué feo?
Claro.
Ojalá tú.
Yo fuera tan feo como tú.
¿En qué sentido?
Entonces tú eres feo. Entonces
No,
que si yo fuera feo como tú, imagínate.
Larry's cracking a joke here. He's saying it's pero sarcásticamente lo estás diciendo porque te consideras feo. I have to explain in an interview. So Larry, his joke is that he calls himself ugly. He refers to himself as ugly. He's like, well, thank God I'm not as ugly as you. And he's saying that sarcastically because he thinks he's at a disadvantage because he thinks he's ugly, but he's not ugly. Yeah, in Venezuela, people like to I can't say this without cussing. What is the word? It's to take a poop on themselves. What do you call that? Self-degradation. it's part of the humor down there. So
Es como decía un gran amigo, en tiempos difíciles es mejor reírse. Nosotros tomamos eso muy a nosotros.
yeah, Venezuelans like to say, we like to say, it's, ¿qué decían?
Es mejor reírse
It's better to laugh at
en tiempos
yourself
difíciles.
in troubled times than to cry.
Porque si el tiempo es totalmente duro y tú estás amargado, bueno, peor va a ser el resultado.
Yeah, because if times are hard and you're bitter, the results are going to be even worse.
The latest song from Larry and Joe, Runnin' from the Weather, from their second album, Manos Panamericanos, available in early fall 2024. Joining Larry and Joe is Appalachian percussive dancer Sophie Wellington in a song that addresses the perils of climate change in the midst of the new Gilded Age we find ourselves in. Thank you so much for being here. We are grateful that you took the time to listen and hope you can help us by spreading awareness of what we are doing. It is as easy as telling a friend and following this podcast on your platform of choice, both of which are free. From there, it takes just a moment to give us a top rating, and where it's an option, a review. It makes a great difference because the more top reviews and ratings we get, the more visible we become to everyone on those platforms, which means that more people just like you connect with artists like Larry and Joe. This series is a part of the lineup of both Public Radio WNCW and Osiris Media, with all the Osiris shows available at osirispod.com. You can also hear new episodes on Bluegrass Planet Radio at bluegrassplanetradio.com. Thanks to everyone on staff at the Earl Scruggs Center for their hospitality, and to WNCW intern Will Prim for helping prepare me for the interview. Thanks also to Jacqueline Anthony for producing the radio adaptations of this series on Public Radio WNCW, where we worked with Joshua Ming, who wrote and performed our theme songs. I'm your host and producer, Joe Kendrick, and this is Southern Songs and Stories, the music of the South and the artists who make it.
They're killing off all the little bugs that help these trees to thrive. John, you can't just blame the weather. Elon's in his spaceship. He's flying off to Mars. Jefferson is mega yacht, sipping Pinot Noir. The rest of us got left behind to count our lucky stars, and y'all, we're all going down together. Let's go! We're running from the weather and we'll all go down together. We're running from the weather and we'll all go down together.
How do we practice rolling R's? Because that's a
It's
hard for us.
¿Cómo pronunciamos la R? Hay gente que nace con esa posibilidad.
Tú lo haces, ¿no?
Sí. So, as a language learner and someone, I've been speaking different foreign languages since I was young because I wanted to. I think it's unfortunate. Some people can have an easier time. It happens to be one of my very few abilities. I can imitate language, and the r was never hard for me. Some people struggle with it and can't do it. And the same can be said for the different sounds. Like is for some people can't do the the jota.
Y hay hispanos que no pueden pronunciar la R.
And Larry's saying there are Spanish speakers that cannot pronounce the r.
Es como acabas de decir, como un
Yeah, so they end up like doing it like rápido instead of r. And there are dialects of Spanish that don't have the rolled R as well. Like they say, there's one in the northwest of Argentina that doesn't have the. So if there's anybody desperately wanting to speak Spanish, but you can't roll the R, go to La Rioja. If you can do the j, you can do La Rioja. La Rioja is La Rioja in La Rioja. So yeah, you got a place you can go.